All right, this last little video clip for Chapter 10, we're just going to talk about interactions between the drug and the host. So sometimes when you take a drug, things don't always go well. So for any type of drug, whether it's an antimicrobial drug or any kind of drug you take, drug safety is always very critical. And as you guys know, many drugs have side effects, because anytime you watch a commercial on TV, they rattle off that laundry list of possible side effects that you could experience from taking the medication at the end. So that's something that we're all familiar with. All right, so your main types of side effects that can occur with antimicrobial drugs are toxicity. So that's where the drug winds up damaging the human body in some way as well, and there are different reasons why that can occur. Now, an allergy is something different. An allergy is where your immune system is reacting inappropriately to the drug. So your immune system is supposed to attack things like pathogenic bacteria, pathogenic fungi, pathogenic viruses, but sometimes your immune system misidentifies things and may react or overreact to something that it's not really supposed to do. So if you have an overreaction by your immune system toward a drug, that would be a drug allergy. So this involves the immune system, this does not. Disruption of the normal microbiota, so we've talked about that many times before. So if you take a antibacterial drug, guess what? If it's a strong, broad spectrum one, it's going to wipe out a lot of your normal microbes, and in addition to the bacterial pathogen that's causing your infection. And then when that occurs, it opens up all this landscape on and inside your body for other microorganisms to flourish. They no longer have those normal microbes as competitors, and so that can lead to problems like yeast infections or C. diff bacterial infections. You know, we've talked about that more than once during the semester. A toxic reaction to a drug that's sometimes called an adverse reaction or an adverse event, and sometimes we don't know why those are happening. So you try to develop these drugs that are very specifically targeting something that goes on in the microbe. You know, we talked about many different examples of how that can happen, but sometimes those drugs will also have effects on some aspect of human metabolism as well. Polymyxin is a good example. That's one of those hole puncher drugs that's used for, especially for some types of gram-negative bacteria like Pseudomonas. But unfortunately, it can also poke holes in the membranes of our cells as well. And so that's a form of toxicity. You have to be very, very careful with that. The aminoglycosides are actually protein synthesis inhibitors in bacteria, but they can also have toxic effects in some people on the kidneys. So you have to be very careful. And sometimes these drugs are safe if you take them at the right dose, and the drug winds up being at the correct concentration in your bloodstream and other body fluids. But if you wind up not taking the drug at the appropriate concentration, suddenly these drugs that are safe at one concentration are harmful if you're taking them at 5 times the level you're supposed to. So don't be one of those people that thinks, I need to get over this infection really fast, well, I'm going to pop 3 pills every 4 hours instead of just 1 pill. The kidney, parts of the body that are very sensitive to some types of drugs, the kidneys, the liver, those are filtration organs, so it's not so much of a surprise that drugs tend to concentrate there and have toxic effects there. And then your nervous tissue can also wind up being sensitive to some types of drugs as well. Now, there are some toxic effects that are more cosmetic than anything else, and some of them are kind of weird. Black hairy tongue, for example, is a side effect that can occur in some people if you have to take the anti-protozoan drug metronidazole. So here's a picture of somebody with a black hairy tongue. And no, your tongue is not really turning hairy. What it is the little papillae on the tongue, the little bumps. For some reason, this drug triggers those to grow longer, so they kind of look a little bit hairy, and then they trap debris, from your foods and so forth on the tongue, and it can make the tongue look black when it's not really black. So that's kind of gross, and not something that's going to be harmful to you, and it will go away when you stop taking drug, but that's an example of a cosmetic side effect. Tetracycline antibiotics, that's a group of protein synthesis inhibitors for bacterial infections, and some of those can cause discoloration of the teeth, can cause them to turn yellow, and you can have enamel damage from those. All right, let's see some other, I think I wound up already talking about a lot of this on the previous slide. Hang on. So we talked about allergic responses. Some people have allergies to particular drugs, like penicillin, for example. And now in rare cases, that can trigger anaphylactic shock. So that's where you have an allergic reaction at the same time across your entire body. And now if you think about what happens during inflammation, so when you guys have learned about inflammation in your anatomy and physiology classes, hopefully one of the things that you learned is that it triggers blood vessels to dilate in the inflamed area. Now imagine that happening all across your whole body all at one time. Because you take this drug that you're allergic to, it gets into your bloodstream, it's going to spread everywhere. So it can wind up triggering this allergic reaction across your entire body all at once. So if a person who's in anaphylactic shock may look red, and that's due to the vasodilation near the surface of the skin, then also think about what that's going to happen due to your blood pressure. If blood vessels are dilating all at once across your whole body, it's kind of like the opposite of squeezing a garden hose. You squeeze a garden hose, that increases the pressure. If you release, it lowers the pressure. So if your blood vessels are dilating across your whole body all at the same time, your blood pressure is going to go down. And so those of you who've had Biology 202 know that vasodilation lowers blood pressure, vasoconstriction increases blood pressure. So when you go into shock, shock is caused by very low blood pressure. Your blood pressure gets so low you can't circulate oxygen, gas, and nutrients to your vital organs adequately, and it can be fatal if it's not corrected. Disruption of the normal microbiota. There's a little diagram over here from your textbook, which is showing you in kind of an artificial way how this occurs. So take a look at that in your textbook, but I just explained it a couple of seconds ago. Like we were talking about, your normal microbes have antagonistic relationships with many opportunistic pathogens. So Clostridium difficile, for example, that's not normally going to cause a problem in a person with a healthy normal microbiota or a healthy immune system. But if you take an antibacterial drug that wipes out a lot of your normal microbes and those C. diff endospores survive, they can germinate and trigger a new C. diff infection, and the C. diff winds up overpopulating in your colon and causes you to develop C. diff colitis, inflammation of the colon, which can be very, very nasty. That type of infection is called a superinfection, not because it's an aggressive, horrible infection, but it's like an infection that occurs due to disruption of your normal microbiota. That can be called a superinfection. Really means like an infection on top of another infection. The reason your normal microbiota would get disrupted is because you're taking an antibacterial drug for a first infection you've had. So this superinfection is developing. It's an infection that's developing on top of the original one you were being treated for. And we've talked about Candida albicans, yeast, and C. diff many times. This is not unusual at all in hospitalized patients, or if you have weakened immunity. A lot of these organisms that cause superinfections are members of your normal microbiota. Candida albicans is a good example of that. And those organisms are living in a balance with your immune system. So your immune system is good at keeping the population under control. So if you have a weakened immune system for any reason, those organisms are not kept in check. They're not kept in balance, and they're going to be able to grow and overpopulate as well. All right, so that's going to kind of wrap up Chapter 10. Again, your textbook is giving you more information than I'm requiring for this particular class, so use your learning objective /study guide for chapters 9 and 10 to kind of carefully guide you through this material. So that finishes up chapter 10. Chapter 11, we're going to get a lot more into infectious disease and what it takes for certain microbes, those pathogens that we like to talk about, what allows them to cause infectious disease when the vast majority of microorganisms out there don't. How are they able to get around our immune system? Our immune system keeps everything else under control. So it's a very interesting chapter, and we'll talk about lots of different topics related to infectious disease in chapter 11. And we'll also talk more about the normal microbes, the ones that live on and inside our bodies and we keep in check and actually wind up being beneficial for us. So chapter 11 should be a very interesting chapter for anybody who's going into the healthcare arena, and a really important one as well.